Hi guys, Olive here. Here today to discuss some books and some situations surrounding books that I have very contradictory feelings about. Sometimes my feelings may not even totally make sense, but sometimes feelings, especially feelings about books, are just like that. This is the Contradictions book tag. It was created by the lovely Daniela over at Only If For a Page. I will link that original video for you in the description box below. Since my feelings about all of these different things are probably going to be very complicated, I'm likely going to have a lot to say. So I should probably get straight to the questions, or in this tag's case, they're more like prompts. And the first one is, I love this genre, but I didn't like this book. If you've been around my channel for any length of time, then you know I love nature nonfiction. I have a particular thing for birds, but pretty much any book that deals with nature or animals, I will enthusiastically pick it up. And the icing on the cake is if that work of nature nonfiction has a memoir component included, where the author will include details of their life in the book, or they'll talk about why they feel personally connected to this topic. Some of my all-time favorite books have that formula, and it's nearly always a slam dunk, that combination of nature nonfiction and memoir. I nearly always love books that have that combination. But there are exceptions to that rule, and one big exception is The Book of Eels by Patrick Svensson. This book is supposed to be about the mysteries of the eel, that snake-like aquatic creature about which a lot is still unknown, even given how much we know about science. We don't know a lot about the eel still. We only relatively recently found out where they reproduce in the wild. We still don't know exactly how they reproduce in the wilds. We've seen them reproduce in captivity, but no one's ever witnessed it in the wild. So they're very slippery in more ways than one. Lots of question marks surrounding the eel. So in this book, the author ostensibly talks about those mysteries. He does talk about the scientists who study those mysteries about the eel. And he also mixes in some personal stories, some memories that he has of spending time with his father and catching eels together. I like the memoir portions. I thought those were really nice. They were touching. I enjoyed reading them. It was the science sections that made me want to rip my hair out. There was so much good information in this book at the beginning. I really did have a lot of hope for this book. But then as it went along, I'm assuming because there still isn't a lot of information about eels to this day, instead of providing more science, he just does a lot of pondering and philosophizing and rhetorical questioning in the style of that unwashed guy in your freshman philosophy class who absolutely did not do the reading. He contradicts himself in this book. He makes some seriously ludicrous arguments, and by the end, I just wanted to toss the book out of a window. I didn't do that. I still respect my books as physical objects, even if I don't like them. So where I put all that frustration instead was a review for Open Letters, in which I absolutely tore into this book using my words. I had never properly panned a book before, and it felt really good. I'm going to be honest about it. So if you'd like to read that review, I'll link it for you in the description box below. I get very, very sassy in it. But moving on to greener pastures, the next prompt is, I rarely read this genre, but I loved this book. And my answer to this one has to be The Sparrow by Mary Doria Russell. This is a science fiction book, and I barely touch science fiction. It's probably one of my least read genres, but I had heard so many people talk about this book over the years that my curiosity got the best of me. I had to see what was going on inside this book, and I fell in love with it. It's probably now one of my all-time favorite works of fiction. Probably not within the top 10. I've done a top 10 list of my favorite fiction books, but I would say this one would rank in the top 20 if I actually sat down to make a list like that. I think about this book all the time. In this book, we follow a group of people, which includes scientists and Jesuits, who are traveling to a distant planet where life has just recently been discovered. And when they get to that planet, they have to figure out how to initiate contact with the inhabitants of that planet. And they're trying to observe them and communicate with them in a way that's not going to cause any damage. But as they all come to find out, them landing on this planet in the first place was the damage, and they can never take it back. There are some seriously devastating consequences for everyone involved. This is a sci-fi book, but It's not a traditional sci-fi book. It's highly literary. It's highly philosophical. I think that's why it appealed to me as much as it did. I actually buddy read this one with my husband because we rarely have a book that sits at the center of a Venn diagram of both of our interests, because he is a huge sci-fi reader and I barely touch it, and he doesn't really dabble in literary fiction as much as I do. So this one seemed like a good one to read together, but he likes traditional sci-fi. So he liked this one, but he didn't love it. But I think the combination of those sci-fi elements plus everything else going on in here, it just worked for me in a really big way. Okay, the next prompt is, I love this trope, but I didn't like this book. And before I tell you what book I chose, it's a romance book, let me tell you about the two different tropes that I've liked in other books that I did not like in this book. They're called hate to love and fake dating. Hate to love means that two characters start off at odds. They don't like each other, but then over the course of the book, they grow to care about one another and eventually fall in love. And fake dating is exactly what it sounds like. The two main characters, the two leads, pretend to be dating one another because it serves both of their interests, normally in different ways, but then it slowly becomes a real relationship to them. So the book that used both of those unsuccessfully, in my opinion, is unfortunately The Dating Plan by Sarah Desai. The two main characters of this book are named Liam and Daisy. They knew each other back when they were both in high school. Liam is a little bit older than Daisy. He was actually best friends with Daisy's older brother, and he was close enough friends with her older brother to the point where he kind of became a part of the family. So they were all really close, and Liam was supposed to take Daisy to her high school prom. But then on the day of the prom, he stood her up, and then he just completely disappeared. And that family that he was so close with never really knew what happened to him, where he went, why he didn't take Daisy to the prom. So years later, these two meet again. Daisy is obviously still very upset, but they decide to start fake dating because Liam needs to appear as though he's about to get married in order to inherit his family business. And Daisy just wants to get her family off of her back about getting married. But then, of course, over time, they reconnect. Daisy gets the full story of what happened back in the day, so that's settled. And then they eventually fall in love. And there was so much wrong with this romance book. I don't think really anything about it worked. I didn't think there was compatibility between the two main characters. I didn't like the execution of either one of those tropes, but especially I didn't like the fact that Daisy's older brother, who used to be such close friends with Liam, was removed from the story for such a long period of time. It was kind of a cop-out. The author just kind of wrote around that. So it was a little bit of a plot hole, honestly. And then how heavy-handed the writing was about letting us know that Daisy as a character was a quirky female character and she was obsessed with Marvel. Like, it was really overkill. I normally have a very easy time falling in love with romance books. It's all about love, so it's normally pretty easy. But this one, I liked next to nothing about it. Okay, the next one is, I hate this trope, but I love this book. And I wouldn't necessarily say that I hate love triangles, but they are certainly tired. They were very overused for a very long time within the YA sphere, or maybe they still are. I don't know. I don't consume much YA content anymore. But a writer who is really good at writing non-annoying love triangles is one of my favorite authors, Lily King. In her latest novel, Writers and Lovers, which I actually reviewed for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, we follow this struggling writer living in Boston in the 1990s, and she's seeing two different men. One is older than her, one is, I think, about her age, but they are totally different from one another. So it's very clear that in choosing between them, she's less choosing a man and more choosing what she wants for her life. In the case of one of the men, it seems like she more wants his life. She wants to be him more than she wants to be with him. So she has a really serious choice to make about what she wants for her future. And I like that about a love triangle because it's clear in this book that there's no animosity or contention between these two men. They're not going to get in a fist fight over her. It's just about this main character making a choice. All right, on to the next prompt, which is, I love this author, but I didn't like this book. And I know my opinion about this book is an unpopular one. I've already experienced that, so I'm prepared for it. But you will know, unless you're brand new to this channel, in which case, welcome. But I make no secret of the fact that my all-time favorite novel is Rules of Civility by Amor Towles. I reread it every single June. This upcoming June will be my 8th reading of it, so my 7th reread. I love it. I discover new things in it every single time I read it. I feel like a piece of my heart belongs to that book. But his second novel, A Gentleman in Moscow, I did not like. And it was heartbreaking for me because on paper, I should have loved this book. This book is by the author of my all-time favorite novel, and it's set in Russia, which is a place that has my heart as much as his first book does. My entire college experience revolved around Russia and Russian studies. I speak some Russian. I've traveled abroad there. I know so much about the history and the culture and the politics and the people. I know so much about it. I should have loved this book. And yet, any historical fiction, if it's set in Russia and it doesn't feel like Russia, I can't take it. I don't like it. And this book did not feel like Russia. Historical fiction set anywhere else in the world, I can be flexible with because I'm not so invested in the history and the culture of the place. I mean, even historical fiction set here in Pittsburgh, this city that I love so much, I would be more flexible about than I will be about historical fiction set in Russia. But I just am too involved in the history of the place, and it seems like most historical fiction set there wants to pretend that things happened that didn't happen or want to mischaracterize it. And I personally feel that Russian history is so complex and so rich and so tragic. Like, Russian history alone is enough to carry a whole story, and I feel that it's very rarely allowed to. A few months back when I was speaking on this channel about my fears surrounding finishing this book, because I strongly suspected I wasn't going to go on to like it, and I was afraid that was going to affect my feelings toward my all-time favorite book, a few of you gave me some very good-natured advice. And you suggested that I read this book and pretend that it doesn't take place in Russia, or that it takes place in a Russia within a different dimension, like an alternate reality Russia. And that was very good advice, and I probably could have done that and had better results. But I just feel that I shouldn't have to do that. If a book is set somewhere, then the setting should matter. It should feel of that place. And if it doesn't, then the author hasn't done their job. And I feel that that's the case with this book. I know a lot of people love it. It is written very beautifully. I had some other problems with it beyond just the Russia stuff. I thought it was kind of boring, and I thought it just turned into a Silas Marner clone. But I don't think I would have the problems with this book had it been set anywhere else. But thankfully, my worst fears were not realized. I still love Rules of Civility as much as I ever did. But up next is a happier prompt. It says, I previously disliked a book by this author, but I loved this book. And for me, that's Middlesex by Jeffrey Eugenides. I really disliked the marriage plot when I read it back in 2015. That's probably an understatement. I would still probably call it my least favorite book of all time. I really didn't like it. And so, obviously, I was very reticent to pick up any other books by Jeffrey Eugenides, but I was talked into giving Middlesex a try by Stephanie over at That's What She Read. She also runs the horror book podcast, Books in the Freezer. You should definitely give it a listen if you love horror books. But we were out book shopping together one time because she's also local to the Pittsburgh area like I am. And she talked me into trying Middlesex because she loved it so much. And while I wouldn't say I loved Middlesex, I thought the way it handled gender issues was a little bit strange. I really enjoyed it. I thought the multi-generational family saga element of it was really fun. So I'm really glad Stephanie talked me into giving this one a try, and I may even go on to read The Virgin Suicides. The next to last prompt in this tag is, I love this cover, but I didn't like this book. And for this one, I choose The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. I had actually pre-ordered the UK edition of this book, basically the moment I was able to. It was another eagerly anticipated second novel from an author of one of my favorites. I love The Night Circus. And this still, to this day, remains one of the most beautiful books I have ever owned. I have ever even held in my hands. The cover is obviously gorgeous, but then the edges of the pages were sprayed with a key, a bee, and a sword, the three main symbols from the book. And it's just gorgeous. I loved just holding this book and looking at it. And then I went on to really not like the book. I thought The Starless Sea was really self-indulgent, like on the part of Erin Morgenstern. Lots of imagery for the sake of imagery. I found the story just meandered. I never fully understood what the story was, what the purpose of the book was. I just found it to be very unsuccessful. And at the time, that really stung because I was so looking forward to it. But it really doesn't bother me anymore, and nor does it take away from my love of The Night Circus, which is awesome. But as gorgeous as this book was, I did end up selling it to my local used bookstore because I knew I was never going to reread it. And as nice as it would have been to keep this book around because it's so beautiful, I just don't have the shelf space to justify keeping a book on my shelves that I know I'm realistically never going to touch again. And it could bring someone else a lot of joy. So I don't have it anymore, but for a time, I owned that gorgeous book. But now for the final prompt. I don't like this cover, but I loved this book. And I have the perfect answer for this one. It's The Body Lies by Jo Baker. I don't like this cover for two main reasons. The first one being that I don't like covers of thrillers that either show or insinuate some kind of mutilation to the female body, which is absolutely what this cover does. And to make it worse, we don't even get to see this woman's face. And the second thing I don't like about this cover is that this book isn't even a thriller. And that's definitely what this cover leads you to believe. The book does have thriller elements. It's a very tense book. We follow a creative writing professor who is forced to take a job at this very rural university when her husband has to stay behind in London because he has his job there, but she can't find a job in London. So she's forced to move up to this university and live by herself. And she has this student who becomes increasingly pushy, increasingly power hungry. He's submitting written work in his creative writing class that is more and more disturbing. So yeah, this book has very tense elements. It's deeply unsettling, but I would not call it a thriller, not by any stretch of the imagination. It is much more a statement about how women can find themselves in these vulnerable positions based on decisions that they make, yes, but also just their circumstances. This main character is acting in a way that is deemed acceptable by society. Don't speak up for yourself. You want to be considered nice. You want to be kind. Don't think the worst of people. Give people the benefit of the doubt. She's doing everything that women are told to be. Like, we should be nice. We don't want to rub people the wrong way. But every single time she makes a choice like that, she's more and more at risk. I think this book suffered from a classic case of being mismarketed. I think it found its way into the hands of thriller readers because of the cover and the synopsis, and then they were rightly disappointed when it didn't end up delivering the experience they thought they were about to have. But I think what the author was actually trying to do with this book has been largely overlooked, and that really bums me out because I think it's brilliantly done. I think Jo Baker is enormously talented. I can't wait to see what else she writes, and I wish this book would have gotten the marketing and the cover that it deserved. But that was the Contradictions book tag. I am definitely left here with some very conflicting emotions about all of these books, but I suspect that was the point. I hope this proved entertaining. I am going to tag some people in the description box below, some people who I think would really enjoy taking on these prompts. But if you do not see your name on that list and you want to do this tag, please feel free to do it anyway. You are welcome to say that I tagged you if you would like, because I would love to see more people do this tag. I think it is incredibly thought-provoking. Any comments or questions you may have can go in the comment section below. Links to all of the books that I discussed in today's video and any other links that I promised you within the video will be in the description box below. And at the bottom of that very same description box, you will find links to everywhere you can find me around the internet, including social media like Goodreads and Instagram, in case you would like to keep up with what I'm reading and writing about right now. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.